Welcome, folks. Whether you consider yourself an insect enthusiast, an arachnid aficionado, or maybe as someone still scarred from an encounter with a creepy crawly, this episode is approachable for all. Welcome to a wild ride through the world of spiders, bugs, and the misunderstood rock stars of the Butterfly Pavilion. Today, we've got two guests from the Butterfly Pavilion who've decided to take a break from their usual invertebrate-based shenanigans and join us as we debunk myths, explore the oddities, and maybe even lower that stigma against our eight-legged friends. I'm joined today by Lorna McCallister and the return of Dr. Rich Reading, who are going to be pulling out all the stops to uncover the incredible adaptations of tarantulas. So buckle up, bug lovers and skeptics alike, because we are about to embark on a journey that's part science, part comedy, and a whole lot of in-your-face bug appreciation. Let the bug bonanza begin. Hey everyone, this is Matthew from the editing room floor with an update. Lorna McCallister now works with the Butterfly Pavilion as a beekeeper associate, but for the duration of this conversation, she was acting in a role as a target species manager. So you'll hear her talk about that role in just a moment, but I just wanted to clarify that her current role with the Butterfly Pavilion is a beekeeper associate. Today, we are joined by two representatives from the Butterfly Pavilion located in Westminster, Colorado. We have Lorna McCallister, a target species manager, and welcome back to the show, Dr. Rich Reading, the Vice President of Science and Conservation at the Pavilion. Lorna, to start things out, can you tell us a little bit about what it means to be a target species manager?
Yeah, so what that means is that I work on our research projects. So we specifically have projects studying fireflies in Colorado, dragonflies. I work on the Bees for Elephants project in Tanzania, where we put the beehives up to keep elephants out of farms. So basically, I help manage our research projects for the Butterfly Pavilion.
Oh, very cool. Rich, you do a very good explanation of your work in the first episode we did with the Pavilion. But briefly again, can you remind listeners what the Butterfly Pavilion is and then what you do with it?
Yeah, the Butterfly Pavilion was founded in 1995, and we're the only AZA accredited, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, standalone invertebrate zoo in the world. So that means we are a zoo of invertebrates, animals with no backbones. We are here to educate people, to do research and conservation on invertebrates, and basically to be a resource for the community. Invertebrates, as you may or may not know, comprise over 95% of the animals on the planet. And so they are overrepresented in the ecosystems we live in, but underrepresented in people's minds, knowledge, and in zoos and aquariums. So we are trying to fill that void the best we can by being the leaders in invertebrate research and conservation as well as education.
I would also add on to that, they're probably underappreciated just in general. As far as popularity goes, they're not necessarily winning charismatic awards out there.
I would agree with you 100%.
Lorna, can you explore a little bit of how you first found your passion for animals and then how that led to you working at the Pavilion?
Sure. I grew up in Florida and I lived next to like a nature reserve kind of area. And so my family was always outside. I was walking around barefoot outside and my mom let me get any animal that I wanted. So I had turtles and chickens and hermit crabs. So I just grew up with a mom that really fostered that. And she actually wanted to be an entomologist when she grew up. She ended up being a midwife instead, but she said she gets to live on through me doing this. So I went to the University of Florida. They have a great wildlife program. And then I went to grad school and I had studied wildlife in undergrad, but then I realized that pollinators are kind of something that really needs to be studied, especially with all the issues that insects are having in our world. And so my graduate project was studying pollinators in Southern Africa. And then once I graduated from that, this position was put out on the internet and I saw they were looking for people that could work on the beehive fencing project. And I actually interned on that project twice before. So I applied and ended up here. It was a perfect fit.
Wow, that's wonderful. Your mom fostering that growth. There's not many parents that sometimes are like, oh, yeah, you should maybe not touch that animal.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Today, I'm very excited because we're dialing in the scope of invertebrates to focus on spiders and tarantulas. One thing that I'm a big believer in is that if there's certain animals that people don't like, often just learning a little bit of information sparks some curiosity in them, or it can even help build a better respect, maybe even an appreciation for animals. So my hope today is to help our listeners uncover a few things that might spark some of that curiosity for them. So, Rich, what work does the Butterfly Pavilion do with tarantulas?
Oh, we do a lot of work with tarantulas. We do work in the field and here at Butterfly Pavilion, both. So the work in the field is looking at a variety of things, but one thing it's looking at is how tarantulas choose the habitats they live in and what are the factors that influence their decisions to live in a particular place. So we're looking at habitat selection. We're looking at what are the factors human caused and natural that influence where they are in the landscape and why they prefer certain habitats. We're also looking at burrow structure. No one's ever done that. And so it's fascinating to me that no one's ever bothered to look at it. We've looked at burrow structures of things like termites, but never in tarantulas, which is amazing. And it's fascinating. These burrows go down quite a few feet and they're quite structurally complex, if you ask me, for a small tarantula that does not a lot of movement. And then another thing we're looking at is, so tarantulas every year, the males that are mature go looking for females. Some people call it a migration. I call it a mate-gration because really it's not a migration. It's males out looking for females. It's a one-way ticket. They're going to either be out there and the female is going to catch them and after they're done mating is going to eat them actually, or they're going to get caught by something else that's going to eat them. Or because they grow these special hooks to keep the females from eating them because they want to breed with as many females as possible. The next time they try to molt, they'll be unsuccessful. They can't molt with those hooks and they will unfortunately pass away. So it's a one-way ticket. They'll go over a mile sometimes, so they can go quite a big distance for a little critter, especially because the females only go a few centimeters, a few inches away from their burrows. It's a big undertaking for these males. And what we want to do is protect them because every year they go out en masse. There's thousands of them out looking for females and they cross the roads and they get, unfortunately, in collisions with motorized vehicles that kill them. So we want to look at where can we put in underpasses and maybe what we call drift fences, so little fences that would move the tarantulas along the fence and under the roads in a safe way, so a culvert or something like that. And then what's also happening is it's becoming very popular to come and watch this migration. And so the Colorado Department of Transportation is very interested in also doing things like putting in little pullouts. So people who come to look at tarantulas, because it's increasingly popular, have a place that's safe that they can pull their vehicle to the side of the road and watch these amazing animals move across the landscape. So there's a variety of things we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at where the roadkills mostly occur. We're going to look at the density of animals alongside the road. It's going to be exciting. And then finally, we do a lot of work with tarantulas here at Butterfly Pavilion. A lot of it is part of a program that we call it the Association of Zoos and Aquariums SWARM, which stands for Safety Web for Arthropod Reproduction and Management. And so it's basically about caring for them in a human cared environment. So what we're doing is breeding them. So we've been breeding a variety of species. We have rosies, which are rose tarantulas from South America. So these Chilean rose tarantulas, they are the rosies that people hold when they come to Butterfly Pavilion, and we need to breed them. They only work about 2 hours a week, so we need a lot of them. And in order to have enough to fulfill the needs or the desires of people that want to hold these incredibly charismatic red rose-haired tarantulas, we want to have more of them. So we're breeding them. We're breeding pink-toed tarantulas. We're breeding chaco tarantulas. We're breeding all kinds of tarantulas. The idea, of course, is we don't want to take any animals from the wild because that would be detrimental to the populations in the wild. So we want to have more animals that are under human care that we bred in that situation. So we could also look at it as an opportunity in the future if we need to putting animals back in the wild. So we'll have a kind of a safety population in this human cared environment, and we'll have a population that is safe and secure so that if populations do disappear in the wild, we can restore them through reintroductions, which we've done with other species in the zoo community. So we do that. We've also looked at some research on different aspects of tarantula biology. So we're doing a lot with tarantulas.
Maybe that'll be my personal challenge for our listeners, that after this conversation today, if you're near Westminster, Colorado, visit the Butterfly Pavilion and go and hold a Rosie, now that you'll have all of this appreciation for tarantulas. So I'm curious to hear from both of you. Maybe Lorna, you can start out, but how do you protect or research or advocate for animals that have a public stigma about them, like spiders and tarantulas often do?
I think changing that stigma is telling people what they do for our ecosystems. So, for example, tarantulas, one, are great pest controls. They eat a lot of the insects that people might not like beetles and things like that. They're also prey items for the wildlife that people do like birds of prey or mammals. And they even are parasitized by wasps that are pollinators of milkweed plants. Milkweed plants are fed on by monarchs. So they have this big role in our ecosystem. They're important and they do cool things that people wouldn't have even thought of, go on the migration. And when people realize, oh, it's not just a bunch of spiders coming out and scaring the town folk, like they're just males going out trying to find females to mate with once in their life, it humanizes them for people. And I think that's also what Rosie does. So when people come to Butterfly Pavilion, they might be really scared to hold Rosie, but when they put their hand out and they feel, oh, she just feels like Q-tips or she's really soft like a kitten, it really changes people's outlooks on things like tarantulas that don't get the best rap.
Yeah, definitely. Rich, do you have anything that you want to expand on that?
Yeah, we're going to actually be doing some social science research looking at that exact thing. We're going to look at people's attitudes, values, and behavioral intentions. What do they plan to do with spiders in their lives before they hold Rosie, after they hold Rosie, and then several weeks after they've held Rosie to see if there's any kind of staying power to any changes we might see in attitudes, values, and behavioral intentions. So we're pretty excited about that research because we believe that by interacting with these animals, you're getting a greater appreciation for them and a greater love for that species and all the species of spiders that exist out there. But I think it's important. I think we'll show that more people should be doing the kinds of work we're doing because it's engendering a greater compassion for these animals that are so important in the ecosystem.
So there you go. When you go and hold Rosie, there might be some lasting impacts. Lorna, can you break down how spiders are classified within the greater world of invertebrates?
They're arachnids. And then within the tarantulas that we're talking about, they're in Theraphosidae. So there are different types of spiders than like jumping spiders, wolf spiders, things like that. Tarantulas are obviously bigger than most spiders. Spiders are different than insects. They have 8 legs. They have 2 segmented body parts instead of insects, which have 3 segments. And they breathe out of book lungs instead of holes, which are how insects breathe. They bring out spiracles through the chitin that covers their body.
And I know, of course, that spiders have 8 eyes. I'm curious if either of you know how well tarantulas are able to see.
I don't think they're known for seeing very well, especially tarantulas that are in Colorado. How they hunt is they have their burrow and then they have a web outside of it, and they really use the vibrations of things walking along that web to pop out of their hole and grab things. So they're not really out walking around looking for prey.
Yeah, that's right. They don't have great eyesight in terms of resolution, but they do see. And Lorna's exactly correct that they're feeling those vibrations and using that to capture prey.
I think it's often a misconception that sometimes we think of, oh, if it has more eyes, it must be able to see a lot better. But there's lots of misconceptions out there about spiders as well. I know when we talk about spiders that, especially tarantulas, one of the more well-known things is their size. But probably a secondary factor is when people think about them, just how hairy they are. And spiders, of course, are not mammals, so they don't have true hair. Rich, can you explain what exactly we're looking at then?
They have these interesting hairs that are a defense system, and they can flick them off. So when they're startled, their major defense is not to actually bite. So most people are afraid of getting bitten by a tarantula. All spiders are venomous, and tarantulas are no different. But the venom's not that powerful, really, in most of them. The first thing they do, because the venom is really for their prey, it's for consuming what they're going to eat, is they flick off these hairs that are very irritating. So they'll try to flick them into your eyes, but they itch like crazy. You don't want them in you, that's for sure. So you don't want to get a tarantula upset with you, because they'll flick off these specialized hairs that they have across their body. So you also don't want to probably pet them, although you could if they're in a good mood. But those hairs could come off, and they are quite irritating.
Lorna, I know you mentioned that we have tarantulas in Colorado. How many species do we have within Colorado?
We used to have 4 classified, but now it's been classified down to 2. So we have the Aphonopelma hensi, which are the ones that we're doing studies on in the southeastern part of the state. And then there's also a miniature species on the southwestern side of the state, Aphonopelma marxi. So we have 2 species in Colorado.
Do you know how common tarantulas are throughout the U.S.? I know that initially, a few years ago, when I heard about the migration or migration, I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to travel to a different state. And then I was like, oh, they're in Colorado. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know that they're in Colorado. And even when you look up like the Texas or Oklahoma brown, the one that we study online, oftentimes it's not mentioned that they're in Colorado. So that's why we're trying to get the word out that we do have these really cool tarantulas here. But across the U.S., they're more in the southwestern part of the U.S. So like Arizona, Colorado, Texas, down into Mexico and those kinds of areas.
I do want to talk more about the tarantula migration. Rich, what's the season that this migration is happening?
Right. So it starts up in late August, but it really gets going in September, into late September and then early October. So the best time if people want to go see tarantulas on the move is really late September. And we have run trips down there with people to see them. And we'll be offering, I think, a trip again. So if people want to come with us, they can certainly do so. It's a great way to learn more about tarantulas, learn more about our research, and see these animals in the wild. It's great. But you can go on your own, of course. Any of the major highways are great places to see them, as well as the national grasslands. Comanche National Grasslands is down there. We do a lot of work with a land trust called the Southern Plains Land Trust. They have over 50,000 acres of protected land down in southeastern Colorado. And so they might offer opportunities for viewing too. I think they have in the past. That's where our research has taken place, the field work component of what we're doing. And so there's opportunities there. But really, south of La Junta is a hotbed for tarantula watchers because going south from La Junta, you can see tarantulas pretty easily. And it's a great place to set off your venture because they have restaurants and hotels and things. So they got those amenities to make it comfortable. But if you want to camp in the national grasslands, you can. So there are also those kinds of more of a wilderness experience. The Comanche is underappreciated, but it's incredibly scenic. And it's got the longest dinosaur tracks in North America, for example, in the Purgatory Valley. And it's got a bunch of tarantulas, thousands actually.
Wonderful. So evidence of some of the larger creatures Earth's ever had. And then you actually might get to see some of the smaller creatures in the area as well. And you mentioned females will only move a short distance around their burrows, but males will move up to a mile, which I think if you put that in terms of like human perspective, that's a pretty good distance. Like we had said earlier, this isn't a true migration in the sense that they're not trying to move away from the cold or the winter that's coming. Lorna, what do tarantulas do when colder weather starts to come through?
So that's something we're researching as well, but we do know that they go down into their burrows over the winter. And so one of our projects is to put temperature recorders inside the burrows and temperature recorders on the outside of the burrows. And we're downloading that data every 2 months and comparing how the temperatures are changing on the outside and on the inside. And what we've found, we haven't analyzed it yet, but we've seen that outside of the burrows, it's fluctuating very rapidly. Within a few hours, it can change a lot. But inside of those burrows, it's staying usually above 40 degrees, which means that the tarantulas are able to stay cozy and warm inside of those burrows. And like Rich was saying before, the burrows are only about 2 feet deep, the ones that we've been able to get casts of. So they're not very deep, but they're somehow insulated enough to keep them warm inside. So they basically just hunker down throughout the winter.
Is there like a shape to the burrows underground? Is it just one deep hole, branches out along the way, or how would you explain the burrow structure?
Yeah, so it goes down straight for a few inches, and then they usually have a turn in it, like a S shape, and then goes down. If we've seen a few that look like they almost have chambers inside of them, they'll have a little bit. So we're wondering what the use of that chamber might be.
Yeah, lots to learn. And then are the tarantulas repurposing these burrows from other animals, or are they excavating them themselves?
We found one that looked like it might have been repurposed. Not 100% sure because putting the plaster in, it might also be just the cracks in the earth that made it look bigger. I think we got 7 casts, right? And out of the 7, only that one was bigger than like a tarantula size. So for the most part, they're digging their own burrows out.
I'm curious to hear from both of you on this one. What do you think is the biggest threat to tarantulas or spiders?
Well, tarantulas, as opposed to other spiders, one of the biggest threats is collection for the pet trade, and especially some of the more charismatic critters. There are really beautiful blue sapphire tarantulas, for example, that collectors will pay a lot of money for because they're just gorgeous animals and they want to keep them. The biggest threat to tarantulas, like most species on the planet, is habitat loss. And we at Butterfly Pavilion are working on conservation initiatives that provide more habitat for critters like tarantulas. We're working with land trusts on protecting more land in the Southeast as an example. And we are working with landowners to hopefully help tarantulas persist on the landscape. So those are the 2 biggest threats, in my opinion. I don't know what Lorna thinks.
I would have said the same thing. Definitely for the international species that are really beautiful, they're being affected by the pet trade, which is why programs like Swarm, where we're trying to create sustainable populations in captivity, is important. And then I think Rich is right for especially our native species, like the ones we have in Colorado. They live in the shortgrass prairie, and America has been losing its prairie very rapidly. So having that habitat loss is really what is affecting our native species, I would say.
This one is also for both of you. If you got to fund your dream project researching tarantulas, what aspect would you be most curious about learning more on?
That's a great question. I would be interested in learning more about the relationship with the parasitic wasps because I'm just fascinated by this relationship. We're learning a little bit through this research we're doing now. But for those who don't know how it works, it's gruesome. The parasitic wasps as adults will go and sting a tarantula and basically paralyze it and then lay an egg inside that tarantula, and the young will hatch and consume the tarantula, starting with the non-vital organs first and then consuming the entire thing before it emerges as an adult. They are a controller on tarantula populations, but they also need nectar for themselves as adults. And so what we think we're seeing is where we have a lot of nectar plants, we have a lot of these pepsid wasps that parasitize the tarantulas, so fewer tarantulas. But where we don't have a lot of nectarine plants, we have fewer wasps and more tarantulas. And it looks like where we have a lot of grazing, that there's less of the flowering plants, fewer wasps and more tarantulas. Where we have less grazing, we have more flowering plants, more wasps and fewer tarantulas. So that's pretty fascinating. I'd love to study that in more detail, understand that whole dynamic better. I'm very interested in interspecies interactions, and that's a fascinating one to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think it kind of speaks to just how complex things really are out in nature. It's not just as simple as humans often tend to think that these interactions are, but there's all of these different layers of, wildflowers means that you need more pollinators. The wasps help control the tarantulas, and so there's this whole network. Lorna, how about you? Do you have a dream project?
That was also similarly my dream project because I also really love pollination ecology. But yeah, connecting that with other pollinators as well. So the populations of the other pollinators that are using, like Rich was talking about, those tarantula hawk wasps, they're really known for pollinating milkweed plants. So it'd be fascinating to find out what other pollinators are benefiting from them being there. And for every wasp adult that you see, that was a dead tarantula. So a tarantula had to lose its life for that wasp to survive and pollinate that plant so that other bugs could then get the nectar and pollen from it. So I would love to study that. I would also really love to do a study on what specifically the tarantulas are eating out there, because when we go do burrow surveys, we'll see, I call them pistachios, like little beetle shells and things like that. So it'd be fascinating to just go out on the prairie and be able to do like a big survey of what invertebrates are out there and how the tarantulas are utilizing them.
Yeah, like a diet analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, bringing it a little bit closer to home now. One thing that I always like to do is try to give listeners ways to either appreciate the animals that we talk about in these conversations in their daily lives. So do you have any advice on how to maybe live better or maybe remove spiders from the home in the best way possible?
I think the best removal method is always a cup and a piece of paper. That's my go-to. But I think just appreciating spiders for what they can do for us, and also doing things which also help other invertebrates will help spiders. So things like reducing pesticide use, supporting habitat conservation, habitat restoration.
We also encourage people to keep, if you will, cluttered, dirty gardens, and that debris in the bottom of your garden is good to retain water, but it's also really good for invertebrates like spiders that live in that debris, like wolf spiders that live down in there, and it provides a better home for them, a better habitat. Things like ground nesting bees, really important that we're not trying to be overly clean in our gardening, but have that kind of mulchy debris layer, which is really useful. So that's one thing that we encourage as well. We encourage planting of native plants, of course, and that provides all kinds of pollinator benefits, which helps everything. And spiders, of course, feed on a lot of those animals, so they benefit from that as well.
And then both of you have really interesting positions and careers that have taken you to work at the pavilion. And so I'm curious to hear from both of you on this. Rich, if you want to start, what advice would you give to people who are either curious and want to know more about animals and wildlife, or who maybe want to start a career in that field, like the younger generations?
I get a lot of people that contact me and ask me how I got into this and how they can do similarly a job like mine. And I always tell them to follow their passion and don't get dissuaded by the difficulty that can present itself. It's tough and it's really competitive because it's a great job and people want to do it. And there's a lot of talent out there. But I do think that if you want to become an ecologist like me, that you probably need an advanced degree. Lorna and I both have advanced degrees. And so that is a very useful entree. But in the meantime, while you're working on those degrees, if you can be a technician for different kinds of positions in the field, helping collect data, and I recommend you try all kinds of different things. So even if you love invertebrates and you know you want to be an invertebrate biologist, maybe do a project on vertebrates, on a bird or a mammal, just to see, maybe you'll change your mind, and vice versa. If you think, I really want to study pronghorn antelope, I would take a job with invertebrates just to see, because you might find, like Lorna and I did, they're incredibly diverse. And if you come to Butterfly Pavilion, we can show you the diversity, but they're incredibly interesting and fascinating once you start to look at them. You can't get enough of them. There's so many of them that there's going to be a species or a critter out there that's going to strike your passion and get you all excited about it, I bet. So get that experience in the field. Come to places like Butterfly Pavilion. We have internships available. So that provides you with the opportunity to grow your professional career. And then look for jobs that will build your CV or your resume to show that you have that interest. And don't lose the passion, because I think when we interview people, we're looking for that passion. And, it comes across really clearly in somebody like Lorna, but all of our team shows this passion for invertebrates. And Butterfly Pavilion is lucky to have that kind of really passionate workforce.
Yeah, I think that the content of what you need to know is maybe not that hard to learn, but developing the passion for it is something that you can't always teach or train in a person. Lorna, how about you? Any advice that you'd give to younger generations?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Rich about getting as much experience as you can. Like Rich was saying, we both started with more wildlife and birds and mammals. When I first started right out of undergraduate, I was doing necropsies on panthers and white-tailed deer in Florida. And just by doing lots of different internships and volunteer positions and different technician jobs, which is really big in our industry, I got a lot of experience. And that's how I realized I really like bees. And then I really like pollinators. And like I said, I did get the job here because I had done internships on the beehive fencing work before. So just having that experience and realizing what you really like, I think is very important. And also just not taking always the first things that come to you, because I would have done my master's on wild turkeys and instead I did it on pollinators, and it totally changed the projection of my career. So yeah, just get as much experience as you can, really try to network and be professional when you're reaching out to people. And like Rich said, visit places like Butterfly Pavilion and learn as much as you can about the different ways that you can work with animals, because there's a lot of things you can do. You can be a zookeeper, a scientist, a veterinarian. There's all sorts of different things you can do by studying animals.
Yeah. And I think, like you're saying, the Butterfly Pavilion's an amazing place to visit because posted all throughout the pavilion, there's little signs talking about the research that's done. And not only can you get excited about the animals that are there, but maybe it sparks some curiosity of, oh, I wonder how they do that research. And so, yeah, it's a fantastic place. And then finally, Rich, what are some of the best ways that people can support the Butterfly Pavilion?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of ways you can support Butterfly Pavilion, and we would love to have people come and be volunteers with us. We like that the best because you engage with us in a fundamental way. Not everyone has the time. You can always give us money. We'll take money in any form. And that support can go to anything that you want to support, be it the research, the facilities themselves, the education component of what we do, which is world class, just like our research and conservation activities. We're doing stuff all around the world, so you could pick a project that you're particularly thrilled about and you could donate to that. But like I said, we'd prefer to have you come and be part of our team and be a volunteer that contributes actively to the work we're doing. And we have people doing all kinds of different things with us. So given whatever skills you have, you can probably bring them to bear at some aspect of what Butterfly Pavilion does. So we have a statistician, for example, who's going to help us do data analyses. We have people who help us with guest relations. We have people who help us with donor relations. We have people that help us with accounting. We have people that help us with the animal collection, feeding tarantulas. So we have volunteers that feed our tarantulas with us. Huge variety of jobs that you can do and undertake to be part of what we do. And you can come visit us. Visiting us is another great way to learn more about us. It's a stepping stone to being a volunteer. But our visitors at Butterfly Pavilion get to learn a lot about invertebrates, of course, but they also get to see them firsthand. And there's nothing like walking through our conservatory and having butterflies flitting all around you or holding Rosie. Those are experiences that your kids will cherish forever and that you as an adult will also find really engaging, I believe. I would say donate, visit, volunteer. Those are all ways you can help. And then if you're really passionate, come work for us. We'd love to have you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rich and Lorna, for being on the podcast today. I really appreciated it. And yeah, just a wonderful conversation all around. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. It was really a pleasure. Thanks, Matthew.
If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe. And to find out more about the work we do to support animals, visit our website at theechofilm.com. Follow us on Instagram at theechoanimals and follow our TikTok at creature.feature. On behalf of all creatures, big and small, thank you for listening.